start off, I lived in a medium-sized house and shared a room with my brother. The room had a window on the right side looking into the backyard. Also, the room was on ground level. It was the last week we were living in the house after about 8 or 9 years of living there. At the beginning of the week, strange things started happening, like tapping and creaking and other things like that. Me and my brother weren't really fazed by it as the house was pretty old, but about 4 days into the week, I woke up in the middle of the night with my TV on, just static. I turned off my TV and went back to bed and fell asleep, when suddenly I was woken back up again and I heard something outside. I saw a dark figure walk past my window. Me, being a kid as this was quite a while ago, was frozen in absolute fear and didn't move a muscle. After about 15 minutes of petrifying fear, I realized my brother was awake too, and he ran off to my parents' room. They just told us it was nothing and to go to bed, so we did. The next day at about the same time, I woke up to the sound of water running in my bathroom. This scared me shitless, but I had to stand up and turn off the water. As I got into my bathroom and turned the faucet off, I saw the same figure that I had seen the previous night staring at me through the small window. I remember its piercing eyes to this day. It was dark, so I couldn't really see its body clearly, but it looked almost human besides the fact that its eyes were a glowing white color that felt like it was piercing into my soul. I bolted out of the bathroom, woke my brother up and gunned it upstairs to my parents' room. My dad was pissed that we woke him up again, so he decided to check what was outside himself. He was horrified at what he saw on the camera. The cameras caught a glimpse of a black figure walk in a frame right before all the cameras went to static. My dad didn't want to call the police as they would have just thought he was insane trying to explain that a monster was stalking his kids. The next morning, I asked my brother if he woke up and anything happened to him in the nights prior to what happened, and he just said he had woken up but not seen anyone or anything. The next couple of nights were eventless, but we kept alert to make sure nothing happened in the night. Finally, the final night before we moved out arrived. I was woken up yet again, but at the same exact time as my brother. The creature was right outside our window, staring at us with its white eyes. My brother screamed as loud as he could, and our dad ran out with the gun and shot the figure. Right before he shot, the figure punched the window, leaving a shattered fist mark into the glass. The figure ran around the corner of the house, leaving no blood trail and no evidence besides the broken window. My parents called the police and explained what had happened. The police officer said there had been multiple calls with the same figure around the area. We moved out the next morning after trashing the broken window. We left the city, never seeing the house or the creature again. Maybe it was something or someone that didn't want us to leave, but all I know is that I would never go back to that house ever again. I was about 3 years old at the time. My brother was 5. Our parents were going through a divorce, so my grandparents offered to look after my brother and I until the divorce was final. My grandparents' anniversary was coming up, so my grandmother thought it would help our mother take her mind off things to spend some time with us so she could relax. She and my grandfather went out for the evening and left me and my brother home with our mother for the night. Things seemed to be going good at first, nothing out of the ordinary at least. When it was starting to become a bit late, and my brother and I were sitting on the living room floor watching television. Our mother was on the couch behind us, and after a while she asked if we heard anything, and I remember we both looked at her, and she had this worried look on her face. She muted the television for a moment to listen, and we started hearing noises coming from our basement. It was the sound of the bathroom door in our basement swinging open and closing again. It sounded like someone had just walked into the bathroom and slammed the door. But that couldn't be possible, seeing as how me and my older brother and our mom were the only ones in the house at the time. Mom dismissed it at first, reasoning that the house was just old, and that old houses usually just make strange noises. So we went back to watching television again for a while, when about an hour or so had passed, and it was about 8 o'clock, almost time for my brother and I to go to bed. Mom muted the television again and told us to be quiet. We listened for a minute and didn't hear anything at first. Then after a while, we began to hear the sound of pounding coming from the basement just under the living room floor. It was soft at first, but as it went on, it got louder and louder. The sound encircled the living room, almost like a shark circling on its prey. It got closer to where my brother and I were sitting, as it circled around us, growing louder and louder until it finally sounded like someone was banging on the living room floor under us with their fist, trying to break through the floorboards. Me and my brother jumped onto the couch and huddled ourselves close around our mom, who was curled up on the couch and just as scared as we were. The sounds of the pounding slowly subsided. Mom frantically dialed the restaurant where my grandfather said he and our grandmother would be. My grandfather was and still is a firm skeptic. He doesn't believe in ghosts. He told her it was probably just the pipes rattling, and that she was just under a lot of stress from the divorce and her imagination was running away from her. He then told her to be sure to have us in bed by 9 o'clock, and he would see us in the morning, and then hung up. A few minutes went by, and we were still huddled on the couch together. Mom did her best to try and stay calm and hold herself together for my brother and I, saying that Granddad was probably right. It was an old house after all. So we went back to just watching TV, trying to take our minds off the situation before we had to go to bed. I'm not exactly sure what happened next, but a strong feeling of fear came over my mom as she turned off the television. I could see it in her eyes as my brother and I looked back at her. We sat there in silence for only a moment. The air was dead quiet. Then the banging started up again, louder than ever. It sounded like someone was frantically trying to break through the floor in a fit of rage. Mom picked up the phone and dialed the restaurant again, but the phone wasn't working. She picked us both up from the floor and pushed us into the main hall and ran to the kitchen to get us our coats from the chair at the end of the table next to the basement door. Suddenly, me and my brother both heard what sounded like a set of heavy combat boots stomping up the basement stairs and a hair-raising slam against the basement door. It sounded like whoever or whatever was down there wanted to get out. We then heard a tumbling noise as if someone had thrown a chair down the basement stairs. Mom didn't waste a second in getting us the hell out of the front door. She practically threw us outside, and we spent the rest of the evening in her car until our grandparents returned home. Our grandmother's car finally pulled into the lot at the top of our street, and my grandfather saw that we were sitting in our mom's car, and he got angry. He demanded to know why we weren't in bed before they'd returned home. Mom told them everything. You could tell by the way she spoke that she was shaken. My brother and I confirmed everything she said, but our grandfather didn't want any of it. He went up to the locked room on the second floor and grabbed a pistol from the gun cabinet and demanded my mom follow him into the basement so that he could show her that there was absolutely no one else in the house. But she refused to follow him into the basement. Of course, after checking everything over, nothing was found to be broken. So there couldn't have been anyone else in our house. Our grandmother didn't need convincing though. She'd always believed in ghosts. But either way, Mom never spent another night in our grandparents' house alone after that. To this day, she refuses to stay after dark. My brother's now 30, and I'm 28. Our grandmother passed away, and our grandfather's health hasn't been what it should be, so I stay with him and look after him. To this day, I don't know who or what was in our basement that night. I hope I never find out. But every time my grandfather asked me to go down to the basement and get something for him, I always get the feeling that there's something down there watching me. And every time I go down there, the bathroom door on the far side of the basement is always open, no matter how many times I close it. Every time I go down there, that goddamn door is always open. Update. I've looked into the history of my grandfather's house where this event took place. As it turns out, several of the previous owners had died on the property. One person had a heart attack and died in his sleep. In one of the bedrooms on the second floor, the second person had died of a blood clot in her brain in our living room. And the third, being the original owner of the house when it was first built in 1911, had fallen down the basement stairs and broke his neck against the wall of the foundation. Could this have been in our basement? In the year 2013, I was a sophomore in high school in Southern California. I had, that year, moved to a city called Menifee, which is mainly a suburb for the working folk in Riverside Country. Anyways, while I was the new kid, I was still able to make a couple of friends pretty quickly. I'm changing their names for ambiguity purposes. Let's call them Bradley, Jacob, and Austin. Bradley being my closest friend among the three to this day. I remember it being on a Friday during that year's fall season. They all happened to live on the same cul-de-sac, which was about over 1.5 miles from where I lived. Since my neighborhood consisted of mostly elderly people, I usually spent my time over at their houses, usually around noon till very early the next morning. Well, the day of my story's occurrence happened to be on one of those days. Frankly, I don't remember what we actually did that day. All I remember was, since it was Friday, my mom allowed me to stay out later. When the time reached around midnight, my mom texted me and told me to come home, as she was going to sleep. And I didn't want to bug them by asking if I could sleep over, so I gave my friends a farewell and headed home. About 5 minutes into my journey is when I realized I actually didn't mind having to walk. The air was nice and cool, and I always loved the night sky. Between mine and my friends' homes, there was an elementary school with a wide, green, flat park next to it. The park having no lights and being totally pitch black. I was about to pass the park when I noticed a man sitting on a bench near a corner of the park, close to me. He was only about 100 feet away. I couldn't really see his face, but could decipher that he was a tall, bald white man in a black hoodie and shorts. Besides glancing at him once and taking in all those said details about him, I didn't really pay much attention to him and continued on my way. I just kept walking forward, occasionally glancing at my phone for no particular reason, until I neared a lamppost near the sidewalk that I was traveling on. I noticed that when I looked down in front of me, a second shadow opposite of my own was casted. I instantly thought that it was someone else, most likely that guy that I had seen earlier. I quickened my pace while trying not to make it too obvious to get some distance between me and whoever was behind me. Now, some people probably wouldn't mind or care if they had to share the same sidewalk with a stranger, but since it was late at night and I'm a pretty scrawny guy, I didn't want to risk getting mugged. Eventually, I decided to cross the street. I looked both ways for cars, but obviously it was just an excuse to see who was behind me, and sure enough, it was the same man. It was a little brighter due to there being lampposts, and I quickly got another look at him. He was well built and about 6 feet tall. After I crossed, I continued down the same route, but shortly after, I noticed that the guy had also crossed the street and was once again right behind me. Okay, now I was starting to get really freaked out as my heart began to beat faster. Up ahead, the street which turned off the road and into my neighborhood was within sight. At first, I felt relieved, but then realized that I didn't want the guy to follow me home and know where I lived. Instead of turning onto my street, I continued walking forward until I approached another street coming off the main road. I quickly sped up and turned in, and once I knew I was a little out of sight, I began to jog away quickly. When I was like 100 yards away from the mouth of the street, I twisted my head around to clarify if the man had continued following me. He was, and not just following me, he was full on sprinting. At that moment, I just decided, fuck it, and also began to sprint away. I didn't even know where I was at that point, or which new street I was turning into. I just had to get away. After running for a while, I ended up thinking of the idea to run to the side of the street of a house that had 2 trash bins next to it. I laid flat on my belly and faced the street. Luckily for me, I had been wearing a black jacket, so hopefully I was able to blend into the darkness around me. I laid there for like a minute, and the guy happened to stop running on the sidewalk near where I was laying. He stood there and scanned the area around him really fast. My heart stopped when he looked my way. But he couldn't see me, and he continued running in the direction he had been facing. I waited there for 5 minutes so that he would be long gone. Afterwards, I bolted straight home, but still took me half an hour to get there. I never told my parents about that experience since we had finally settled in and I had made my own group of friends and didn't want to risk moving again. The event itself slowly faded away from my mind until recently. My only precaution to this was to never walk home at that time ever again. I never found out who the guy was, but in the years following, I discovered that in the early 2000s, the local high school had a neo-Nazi problem, but has since been rooted out. I'm not positive that's why he ran after me, but it does seem possible that a white supremacist wouldn't mind roughing up a smaller Latino in the middle of the night when no one else was around.